Alright, this is a test run for a video that I will be showing my ethics class on coronavirus and the eviction crisis. I'm also going to post this to Facebook because I think it will be of general interest and maybe I can get some feedback. So I'm going to start by talking about the economy. The pandemic has caused a surge in unemployment unlike anything the country has seen in decades. The surge happened in March, which is when this chart was published. This looks at first-time unemployment insurance claims, that is, people who just lost their job and are filing for unemployment benefits. As you can see, it's completely off the charts compared to anything that's happened since the 1970s. Things have calmed down a little bit since then, but you see that still far more people are filing for unemployment than ever have in recent history. So the previous slides were unemployment claims. This chart is the unemployment rate. You can see from the you can see that the unemployment rate peaked at about 15%, which is the highest it's ever been since World War II, when we started tracking unemployment using modern methods. The current unemployment rate is down a little. It's 11.1% on this chart, and I just heard on the radio that it's down even a little bit further, down to 10.1. But that's still higher than any time since World War II. It's harder to make good comparisons going back to the Great Depression, so-called apples-to-apples comparisons, because of differences in record keeping. Although some people estimate that at the height of the Great Depression, unemployment was around 25%. So it's still not quite that bad. But again, the largest we've seen in the post-World War II era. The economy is in recession. The recession was officially declared by the National Bureau of Economic Research on June 8. Since that time, we've had the biggest economic contraction in the history of the record-keeping system. The second quarter of 2020 saw the economy contract by 32.9%, which is 3 times the size of the biggest previous contraction, which was 1958. So, the eviction crisis. It's not surprising that under these conditions, a lot of people are missing rent and mortgage payments. So as of July 24th, 12.5 million people have missed rent payments. 24 million people say they are unsure how they will make their next rent payment. And total back rent in the U.S. economy now stands at $21.5 million. This chart here shows where people are at risk of eviction. And as you can see, we here in Ohio are about in line with the national average, where 41% of everyone who rents is at risk of eviction. And it gets a little higher in other places, a little lower in others, but this is about average. So the response to the eviction crisis. One thing you hear a lot about are eviction moratoriums. These actually were a complicated set of federal, state, and local laws that didn't provide many protections and now have mostly expired anyway. So at one point, there was a federal ban on evictions. It was instituted as part of the CARES Act on March 27. And it applied to properties where the landlord had some kind of federal backing, either a federally backed mortgage or Section 8 housing assistance. And this was about 1/4 to 1/3 of all rental units. However, this protection expired on July 24th, and evictions in places previously protected by the Act can begin on August 24th. About half the states have some kind of eviction ban. In Ohio, Governor DeWine requested that landlords hold off on evictions for at least 90 days, but this ran out on June 30th and was just a request anyway. Similarly, the Ohio Supreme Court recommended that courts suspend all eviction proceedings and scheduled move-outs, but that is not binding. In March, Ohio utilities pledged to stop disconnecting people, but that pledge also expired on July 1st. So right now, eviction court is in session in Cleveland, Lorain, and Elyria. In any case, for most eviction bans, whether federal, state, or local, the onus of blocking the eviction was on the tenants. So if the landlord tried to evict the tenant could, if they knew the law was on their side, object. But if they didn't know the law was on their side, they're out of luck. Princeton University's eviction lab has given Ohio's response to the COVID eviction crisis a 1/2 star out of 5. By contrast, Connecticut got 4.5 stars, and 14 states got 0 stars. That means that the state has done absolutely nothing to deal with the eviction crisis, whereas Ohio has done 1 or 2 things. It is especially worth emphasizing that the eviction crisis is going to have a higher impact on people of color. So both coronavirus and eviction disproportionately affect people of color. So let's start with coronavirus. As you can see, it affects blacks and Latinos at a higher rate than whites. There are several reasons for this. People of color are more likely to work in frontline jobs. They're more likely to use public transportation. They're more likely to have pre-existing conditions. And they're more likely to live in smaller multi-generational homes. Actually, let me back up a step. The reason they're more likely to have pre-existing conditions is itself a separate topic for injustice. There is a lot of racism in the way medicine is distributed in America, and so medical racism has led to more pre-existing conditions among people of color. And again, people of color are also likely to live in smaller, physically smaller, multi-generational homes. Eviction also affects people of color more than it affects white people. And this was even prior to coronavirus. So Matthew Desmond, who we're going to be reading in the course that this video is for, in his 2016 study of eviction in Milwaukee, discovered that among Milwaukee renters, over 1 in 5 black women report being evicted in their adult life, compared with 1 in 12 Hispanics and 1 in 15 white women. And Desmond trenchantly sums up the situation like this. If incarceration has come to define the lives of men from impoverished black neighborhoods, eviction was shaping the lives of women. Poor black men were locked up, poor black women were locked out. Given that both coronavirus and eviction hit people of color harder, it should come as no surprise that the combination of the two crises creates a major crisis. So I mentioned earlier that 24 million people in America are unsure of how they will make rent. Over half of those people are black or Latinx. Resistance. So I've been painting a pretty grim picture here. I want to end on a more hopeful note by talking about responses to the situation from the ground up. The government's response has been inadequate, but the people's has not. There's been a lot of activism demanding a return of eviction moratoriums and even canceling rent and mortgage payments. Perhaps the most dramatic form of protest has been blockades of eviction courts. Here's one in New Orleans, organized by the New Orleans Renters' Rights Assembly on July 30th. NOLA.com, which is where I got these pictures, it's also the New Orleans Times-Picayune website, reports that the protest succeeded in disrupting a variety of court hearings, including evictions. Now, the Renters' Rights Assembly got some blowback about this. In particular, people were upset that other court hearings besides evictions were being disrupted. This is their response. Are you upset to hear that people were unable to get to court yesterday, even the people who had nothing to do with eviction proceedings. We are too. It's really unfair that the first and second city court judges, the mayor, the city council, put the hardworking people of this city in the unfair and terrible position of having to reschedule hearings or come back on other days to file paperwork. If they took action in the first place to keep the eviction moratorium in place, no one would have missed their court-related business yesterday. But we know that you understand that the point of this protest is to interrupt business as usual. The point is to get those in power to stop pretending that nothing is happening, that 140+ thousand people have not died of coronavirus already. So, the New Orleans group hung a sign that said eviction equals death. A similar theme was in a protest in Kansas City at that same day. A group called KC Tenants held a protest in front of the eviction court in Kansas City, Missouri. They hung a banner with basically the same message, and the speeches they gave emphasized that people who are evicted during the pandemic are at a great risk of getting COVID and dying. In addition to blocking eviction courts, activists have started blocking eviction proceedings at people's houses. On July 31st, a Maryland landlord named Robert Miley threatened his tenant with an illegal eviction. And we'll be talking more about illegal evictions in the course. A group of about 50 tenants' rights protesters showed up at the house to block the eviction. And there are protests like this going on all over the country, calling for rent relief or rent cancellations. This one is from Washington, D.C. So there is an eviction crisis going on. No, the government is not acting to prevent it, but the people are starting to.